Okay, so now once we have this form, let's create a view to render this form. So in here, in the users app, we have this views.py file, and in here is where exactly we will be building a view, and the view which we will be building is going to be a login view that's going to render the form which we have just created, which is this form right here. So let's go ahead and let's do that. So first of all, in order to create a view, I'll create a function. So let's name this thing as user login. Obviously this view is actually going to accept a request, so here I would say request. And now in order to render a form which we have just created, what we simply have to do is that we have to say form equals login form. So that's actually going to go ahead, get the login form, and we just have to render this form. So here I would say return render and simply pass in request. And here, as we want to render this particular form, this form needs to be passed to a template. So here we have not yet created a template. So in order to create a template, let's create a template called as login.html inside the users app. So here I need to specify the path as users/login.html. And then to this particular template, I need to pass in the form which we have created as a context. So here I would simply say form. So here we are simply passing in the form, which is the login form, as the context. And one more thing that needs to be taken care of is that you actually have to import the form. So here it has automatically imported that for us. However, instead of saying this, what I could say is that I could say something like from.forms import the login form, so that we don't have to write this long import statement. Now let's go ahead and create a template to render out this form. So let's go back to the file explorer, and in order to create a template, you obviously need to set up a templates directory. So in the users app, create a new folder called as templates. In templates, create a new folder again called as users, and then in this users, let's create a new file which is nothing but login.html. And right now, let's say we simply say something like this contains form. So we have not created any fancy template, nor we have rendered the form right here inside the login.html. We have simply added some random text here so as to see if this thing is actually even functional. So now once we have done that, we will now go ahead and associate this view with a URL pattern. So now in order to associate this view with a URL pattern, let's go ahead. And first of all, we have to create a urls.py file in users. So here I would say urls.py. And now we have to associate this urls.py with the main urls.py which we have in this main project. So in here, let's go to the main project. Let's go to urls.py. And here I have to import something which is called as include. And what this include does is that it allows us to include a urls.py file of the apps as well. So here, once we have done that, I simply have to create a path for our users app. So here I would say that I want to point out to the users urls.py file whenever the user types in a URL like users/. So here I would say comma and include the path, which is nothing but users.urls. Make sure that you have enclosed that in quotations and give a comma when you add this URL pattern. So now this will actually point out to the urls.py file, which is the urls.py file of the users app, which is this file right here. So once we have done that, now let's start adding some code in the urls.py file here. So here, I'll simply copy the code which we have here, go back, paste it up over here, and now let's remove a couple of imports. So I would remove the include. I would also remove the URL patterns which we have here. We obviously don't need an admin over here either, so let's remove the admin as well. And now we have to create a URL pattern which links with this particular view, which is the login view. So here I would first import views. So I would say from dot import views. That's actually going to import the views file, and then create a path which links with the login view. So here I would say path, and let's say the path for this thing is going to be something like login/. And this is going to be associated with the login view. So I would say views dot user underscore login, and let's name this view as login as well. And at the end, ensure that you have a comma. Once we are done with this, we are pretty much good to go. So let's take a look at the flow in which this is going to work. So now when we are going to run our app, we are going to open up our browser. We are going to type in the path, which is users/login. And that's because whenever we run our app, it's going to take a look at this file. So it's going to take a look at users. It's going to include users.urls file, which is this file right here. Then when we type in login, it's going to render the login view. The login view is nothing but this view, and this view renders this template along with the login form which we have created. The login form we already know is a Django form which we have created. Then it's going to point out to the login.html template, which currently does not contain any kind of form. So we are simply going to get this text over there. So let's see if that thing is functional. So I'll open up the browser, and here I would go to /users/login. So as you can see, it says this contains a form. However, we do not have any form in there. So now let's see how we could render out a form over there. So in order to render the form, we simply have to make a couple of changes. So here, instead of rendering this text out, instead I'll create a form. So here I'll create a form, and inside this form, as I have to render the form which is being passed as context, which is this right here, I would simply say form inside of a template syntax. So make sure that you use template syntax here, and we want to render this form in terms of paragraph. So I would say .as_p, which means as paragraphs. And also whenever you are creating a form, you also have to ensure that you're using a CSRF token. So here I would say CSRF_token. And here, instead of having an action, let's say we want a method of this form to be post. Okay, so once this thing is done, we are pretty much good to go. So now if I go back to the browser, hit refresh. Now as you can see, you have a login form right here, but we simply have the form and the form fields, and we do not have a submit button here. So we have to add that submit button manually. So let's add input. Type is going to be, let's say, submit. So once we do that, now we have a submit button up over here as well. However, if I type in some username and some password here and click on submit, now nothing would happen. So let's try that. So I have typed in some random username and password. When I click on submit, the form just disappears. And that's because whenever we are clicking on submit, technically a post request is going to be submitted. So when you request for this form, we are essentially making a get request, and we are clicking on the submit button, we are making a post request. So the get request logic is already handled by this view right here. So by default, whenever you create a view, that view is for handling the get request, but we do not know what needs to be done whenever there's a post request. So whenever we have a post request, that is whenever we are submitting the username and password, we want to log in the user into our Django app. And for that very reason, we have to write logic to handle what happens when the request method is post. So we are going to learn how to do that in the next lecture. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you.